It's that time, everyone. Time to talk OU football. Boomer Sooner right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Leave those comments and questions. Yeah, we get a horns down right off the bat. Good stuff. Leave the comments and questions there in the chat. We got Jason Watkins on the line to help us out this week. We appreciate Jason. And we got together last week to talk some Big 12 football. So check out that debate over on the main channel. So we talked realignment. You can catch Jason's work on College Football Hall of Fame podcast. Hey, Jason, what's going on?
How's it go? How's it going, Mark? Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here. And for you folks that join us on a regular basis or maybe stumbling upon us for the first time, we typically come your way every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. But sometimes we got to fluctuate that schedule. So please turn on that notifications once you subscribe to know when we go live. Well, we could go a lot of different ways with this, Jason, because, you know, college football never stops. A lot of things to talk about, but people are most interested in recruiting, and for good reason. That's the lifeblood of the program. Big weekends coming up really across the country for most teams, late May, early June, a lot of camps, a lot of next opportunity to see recruits, see what they're made of, see what they can bring athletically in some of these camps, visiting the campus as well. Oklahoma has an annual barbecue. That's a big deal. You know, what are you hearing right now, and what are you looking out for?
I think that was the weekend last season whenever Brent Venables made a big impact. It was a concern for everybody that you weren't seeing a lot of these commitments at that point. After that barbecue weekend is when you ended up getting Jackson Arnold and then PJ Adebawari and some of these guys that we're expecting to come in, make an impact this season. I would think that they're obviously expecting a lot of the same this year. You have 3, 4, 5 big-time defensive linemen that are in the picture. They've got Oklahoma in their top, some of them in their top 7. You've got a few that are down to their top 4 or 5. I think this is where, if you're an Oklahoma fan, you're excited, is because Brent Venables is known for his defenses. He had a top 10 defense for 8 straight years there at Clemson. They did it in the trenches. And this is where the biggest problem probably was for the Sooners for the last, well, really since Venables left, was playing defense and being able to win in the trenches. You know, you didn't have those Gerald McCoys or Tommy Harris's anymore in there to make those big stops. So you had to rely on outscoring everybody, which is kind of the way that the Big 12 went for a long time. But now, on top of having solid offensive production that you're still expecting, now they're adding, even if they get 2 of these guys, they're going to be in great shape. They've done well in the transfer portal, in the trenches. So it's one of those things where this is a huge time for Oklahoma heading into this season. They're trying to turn it around from that 6-7 campaign in 2022, and defensively will be the way you get it turned around when you're heading to the SEC in a year.
Yeah, Jason, you had mentioned what happened last year, where Oklahoma fans were a bit disgruntled at this point with all the 3-star commitments, and then bam, all of a sudden they start to latch on to some big recruits, and obviously it all ended well with a top 5 recruiting class. So there's got to be some trust of Brent Venables in the process this year that wasn't necessarily there because of the proof of concept not being applied at Oklahoma yet for Sooner fans, but they should be a bit more trusting this year, you would think.
Yeah, and I think the main thing, and even after that, when you didn't get, some of the commitments in the trenches, they were going after what's his name? There was a couple of guys, a linebacker, and then, they had a flip of a guy that was a Texas legacy. It was weird that he even had committed to Oklahoma at one point. Then obviously they weren't able to make good on the kid out of Houston on the defensive line. So there was still a lot of questions about whether or not we're going to be able to do this. What a lot of us creators from the OU space were trying to say was, look, it's been a long time since these guys have been in that room at all. You know, when you start talking about these big defensive linemen, which, you know, something that I've got a friend that always says, hey, man, God makes less of those guys. There's just not that many of them to go around when you're talking about 6'5", 6'6", 350 and move like like some of these defensive linemen can. And so there's a lot of competition for those guys, right? And before, Oklahoma wasn't getting in the room. And now they are. And it's because of the fact of what this staff, which was Coach Venables, Todd Bates, you know, a lot of these guys that came from that Clemson area, even guys like James Skalski and obviously, I mean, this is Clemson West, really, when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. And that's where they made their name over there, was being able to get into the room of those guys in Florida, get into the room of these big defensive linemen that really made big strides. And if you look at their transfer portal work in the past, well, really in the past year, you know, it's looking really good. You know, they just this past this week, you had Connor Neer, who was a Division II linebacker, but looked like he was headed to Michigan State. He got picked up there and decided to go ahead and go to Oklahoma as well. Another offensive line from App State, you know, Troy Everett coming in. That's a big move for them. That was one of the places, if you were watching the spring game, you were a little concerned about it, because if there was a problem, the defensive line looked great. You know, they were getting pushed with one of their transfer portal guys, or a few transfer portal guys that they got. Rondale Bothroyd from Wake Forest, which that guy's a game record. You're just excited if you're an Oklahoma fan watching him. Obviously, you had guys like Dasan McCullough, who was a freshman All-American a year ago at Indiana, and he was all over the place. But it concerned a lot of people on what's going on with the offense. Why is the offensive line allowing all this pressure? You kind of you can't have it both ways. But if they're trying to shore up that offensive line, and I would say that there was a lot of offensive line talent. They only had 6 healthy linemen for the spring game. So that was important for them to they're shoring up some of that. You do have, you know, Bill Bedenbaugh is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. So, you know, they're going to do what they need to do. And that's probably been the most consistent unit in the last probably 5 or 6 years anyway, for Oklahoma, is that offensive line play. So you see them making these moves, and then you add a guy like Jordan Tyson. I think that the biggest question offensively, to me anyway, is what are they going to do with the wide receiver room? You've got, you know, obviously you had Marvin Mims leave. He was a second-round selection of the Denver Broncos. The rest of the room was really unproven. When you think about Jalil Farouk, he's had some moments where he looked really good, and they're expecting him to be their number one guy. But the rest of these guys are kind of unproven commodities, if that makes sense. And you've got freshman guys coming in. You've got a couple of portal guys coming in. But, you know, to go and get a guy like Jordan Tyson out of Colorado, I think that was one of the guys that Coach Prime expected to stay around. And for him to end up in Norman, that's kind of a big win for Jeff Levy and his crew. So now, even though there is a lot of unproven talent, you've ended up with more. And Jordan is kind of a proven commodity when it came to, obviously, Colorado struggled quite a bit, but he was definitely their best receiver. He was their number one receiver a year ago.
Yeah, with this transfer list coming into the program up to 15, what I'm seeing that I don't see out of a whole lot of programs is you see these transfer lists and you can kind of project that these guys are just going to be guys that are going to take up snaps. They're going to give relief to the frontline guys. They're going to be in the rotation. They'll contribute. They'll just kind of be a body to take up space, get the job done, not embarrass themselves, that sort of thing. But you mentioned McCullough and Bothroyd, and this is where I was taking the conversation next, but you beat me to it just in regards to who you really like on this transfer portal list. And those are the two guys that obviously have done it at the Power 5 level. And like you say, they've not just taken up snaps, they've made plays in the opposing team's backfield. They've shown that they can change the line of scrimmage and make plays.
Yeah, and if you were watching anything after that first 3 games a year ago, you weren't getting a lot of push on that defensive line. You weren't getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback, which in college football is so important. Even if you don't get home for a sack, just getting pressure on these quarterbacks is important. And you just didn't see a ton of that a year ago. Not to say that there wasn't some talent there, but it wasn't the kind of talent that you're going to need when you get to the SEC, because then they come in waves, you know. I think about Georgia losing Bear Alexander, but they've got 5 other guys that are just like him, you know, that are they're gonna continue to go that way. The same with Alabama. They're gonna load up on that defensive line every year. So depth is so important, and I think that's why you're looking at guys that they're recruiting now for the 2024 class. The guys that they're really in on: David Stone from IMG Academy. Obviously, Williams Waneri from that Kansas City area. He's got Caden Green was his teammate in high school already. He looks to have a crystal ball. He should be headed to Norman. Nigel Smith, who may be the best athlete that I've seen out of any of them when it comes to defensive linemen, although, Stoney, same thing. These guys are unbelievable, right? I mean, but Nigel, his dad played professional basketball, and you watch him play basketball, just the way that he plays, and it kind of reminds me a lot of that Bothroyd type, is that these guys they're going to get a push and they're going to make a play. And that's what you got to have. I think offensively, if you look at last season, they were still a top 15 total offense, even with Dylan Gabriel having a couple of games out. They were 124 on total defense out of 131 teams. They were 6-7, but think about what happens if they're top 70 in total defense. What does that team look like then? They probably win 10 games. So, it's just a matter. I mean, they lost 4 of their 5 losses. They had 5 losses by 1 score, and 4 of them were by a field goal. Any number of things could have changed that, but the defense just making a stop here and there even would have been a big difference. So that's the clear picture that they know where they're headed, is that right there. And obviously with Brent Venables, that's going to be his bread and butter, is building up that defense and getting them ready in that respect for the SEC. I think offensively, they're not going to have a problem in the SEC. They're going to get out there and do what they need to do. You've got Jeff Levy. You've got a 5-star quarterback in Jackson Arnold that he could push, I think, a little bit for Dylan Gabriel this year. But I think that the hope is that Dylan makes that job his own this year again, and you get a chance to, work Jackson in. You don't want to have to rely on any true freshman, even if he's a 5-star guy, to have to come in and be the guy right now. But I think that with their schedule, the way that it is, this recruiting, a lot of these guys are going to get a chance to play early, and I think that kind of plays into their hands as far as the recruiting is concerned. And when you've already got a top 4 class, you got a top 8 class the year before that, they're headed in the right direction. So you got to – I know as an Oklahoma fan, I'm excited about it. Is there still something to prove for Coach Venables? Sure. There's something to prove for everybody. But I think that a lot of this doom and gloom and, scared of what happened a year ago, without context, yeah, maybe it looks bad for Oklahoma if you don't add in that context. But I think for those that are close to the program and are really looking at every bit of it, there's a lot to be excited about in Norman.
Jason, obviously all this happens because teams have money to spend and they can go out and visit these student athletes and do all the other things that are required to keep a staff together to go out there and recruit and hit the pavement. Well, numbers were released and reported all over the place across college football in regards to recruiting budgets for 2022, and then going back even beyond that, back to 2017. Now we've got the Big 12 numbers up here, and this should be no surprise to anybody. Oklahoma and Texas are outspending everyone by more than 2-1. The next closest competitor there at West Virginia is not spending $1 million per season. At least, they spent close to $1 million in 2022 and weren't anywhere close to that, more in the $600,000 range per season, per calendar year, fiscal year to be exact, before that. But Oklahoma and Texas, those numbers look like SEC numbers, and for good reason. They're the blue bloods. They're the ones that make the money. And obviously the competition is going to get a little bit stiffer here in a few years. So any reaction to these numbers?
It's what you would expect. I'm a little surprised that the number is that equal when it comes to OU and Texas. If you hear Texas talking about it, they're gonna, the poverty is up above the Red River line. So, but it's not that surprising. And when you look at, I guess my wonder is why you saw that Texas Tech is obviously, they made a big jump. So did West Virginia, just in the 22 spending, obviously. But they kind of have to, now that you have these 4 new programs coming into the Big 12, you've got your blue bloods leaving. Who's going to make that jump? Who's going to take that step forward? In some of these other programs that are coming in, you look at people like UCF. I mean, they have a huge fan base. They have a huge enrollment there that they're going to bring a lot to the table there. Gus Malzahn is a good coach. I think BYU is a national program that is going to surprise a lot of people right away. I do feel like Houston could be good. I'm not sure what they're. I'm.
Hopefully, we'll get Jason back. Just to continue on that.
When it came to Houston.
Oh, go right ahead, Jason. I think we got you back.
Yeah, sorry. I have the phone turned off and it just went on anyway. Sorry. No, when it comes to Houston, I was just talking about, I'm a little concerned about what they're looking like right now, because just a lot of the things you saw during the year. But now that they're in a quote Power 5 conference, that's heavy recruiting ground in that Houston area, that you might start seeing some of those kids remain there. I'm not sure that Dana Holgerson is going to be around for the long term, but I think that, again, this is where, if you're Oklahoma State, you need to step up and spend that money. And I think part of that is, there's a difference on that one, is that they don't have to do as much. What was it that they were talking about? There's the discrepancy there isn't as crazy as it seems like it is. And I forget exactly what they were talking about when it came to that. But overall, I think that it's not that surprising to see some of these guys take a step forward when it comes to the other schools in the Big 12. When it comes to Oklahoma and Texas, you're going to have to do that. You're headed into big boy football from week to week. And if you're going to compete with the likes of Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, Florida, I mean, Florida is obviously, they're kind of in a down area right now. With Billy Napier, I believe that they're gonna probably end up back where, I mean, they're not going to stay down forever. In the end, Oklahoma and Texas are not okay with not competing. And particularly, I'm going to talk about Oklahoma, is that it's not even okay just to get to the playoff anymore. Now, if you're an Oklahoma fan, you're expecting them to compete for national championships. If you're going to do that, you better be ready to spend the kind of money that it takes to go get those guys and be in those rooms like what we talked about and talking to the premier players in the country.
Absolutely. Going back to the Big 12 situation, when I see each one of these programs that are entering the league, especially the 3 coming in from the American, they're going to have their struggles. They're going to have their challenges. They're stepping up in quality of play each week. They're used to playing that level of team, but they're used to playing that level of team 2 or 3 times a year, not 9 or 10 times a year. But they all bring some type of cachet or a resource that's kind of uncommon to the Big 12, in that, like you mentioned with UCF, with the population center, who knows what their connections to Disney are. I don't know, in terms of any kind of NIL opportunities and other things there, but they're in the state of Florida. The recruiting, I would think that they would be able to sell the Big 12 more than the American Conference in regards to keeping some of those Florida players at home to play for UCF and not going somewhere else. Cincinnati, Ohio, good recruiting state, not anywhere close to Texas or Florida. It's dropping, but still it's in the top 7 or 8 in the country. So it's a strong recruiting state for Cincinnati, big
Right.
metropolitan area. And then the same thing with Houston, max that out. Houston's basically Atlanta when it comes to producing NFL players. I know that one of the really
Absolutely.
good Houston teams, Jason, from about 10 years ago, the Ed Oliver team that won the Peach Bowl, beat Florida State, that there was a statistic out that was the first team ever that had that kind of success that stayed within 50 miles of its campus to recruit and sign all of its players. Like they don't have to go anywhere. Of course you are,
That's right.
because they're going to be good fits for your program, but you don't have to if you can keep those guys home. So they all bring some resources that are kind of unique to the Big 12 just because of being in bigger metropolitan areas.
Absolutely. And then you talk about BYU, even that's a national brand,
Yeah.
when it comes to that. So I agree with you. I think that Cincinnati, obviously Luke Fickell was a big part of that, of what they were doing. And so you kind of have to wait and see what Satterfield's going to be able to accomplish there. But yeah, and I think that right now Houston is the one I'm concerned with, if anything, because I just think that Dana kind of lost control of the show. You had guys fighting on the sideline last year and stuff during games, fighting each other. So that's the concern there. They've been losing some guys in the portal all of a sudden, and it just kind of happened in the last few weeks that they're losing some key players to the portal. It makes you kind of wonder what's happening there. But yes, whatever happens there, if you could go and get a guy, I've always said, you go find a guy like, say, Trailer out of UTSA, in that Jeff Traylor, yeah. What a coach. He's doing things at UTSA that this was an NAIA school 15 years ago, 20 years ago, So there's some guys out there that definitely could step up, get that job, and make it their own. And now that they're a Power 5 school, there's always been a lot of talk that Texas is the one that kept them out of the Big 12 conference to begin with, and now that Texas is leaving is why they were able to come in. But I think that's kind of one of those sleeping giant programs that, yeah, you're right. You don't have to leave that area. There is so much really good football. Katy Pate's out. They've got, even in Katy, which is just outside of Houston, you've got 3 big-time programs that are producing amazing talent year after year. Oklahoma has dipped into the Houston market quite a bit with some of their skill guys in the last few years. They're always going to be heavy into Texas. And then, of course, the Longhorns, they love recruiting Texas, and love recruiting Houston. They love being able to go in and get those guys, and that's always kind of been their advantage over somebody like Houston is that they call it the commuter school, blah, blah, blah. And then we're Texas. Well, having them in the American Conference was one thing. Now that they're in a power conference, this is going to kind of hurt them a little bit in that as far as that's concerned. Now, obviously, Texas has an advantage with the money that they can spend, just like Texas A&M does as well. But I think that you could see Houston be big right away. But I think that right now, I'm not sure what's going on with their coaching staff, but it's that may be good for the rest of the Big 12 right now, because if they get rolling, it could be hard to stop them moving forward.
Yeah, you old timers will remember Houston in the Southwest Conference giving Texas and Arkansas fits on a pretty regular
all the time
basis. Absolutely, no question about that. Jason, when I look at the rest of this list of spending and recruiting in the Big 12, what catches my eye is I've always been a bit curious about Oklahoma State. So Mike Gundy, of course, had a tremendous year in 2011, where it can be argued, we could argue all day and all month whether they should have been in the BCS championship game. But they had a really good run there where it looked like they were on the cusp of playing with the heavyweights year to year. And then they just kind of settled into this 8-4 decade where 8-4 was pretty much the standard and what it was. And I thought, man, this guy must be comfortable with going 8-4. And not to be too critical, it takes a lot of work to go 8-4 in the Big 12. It's not like he's sitting back or anything, but it just seemed like they were kind of in a resting spot going 8-4. And then a couple of years ago, they came within a couple inches of going to the playoffs and winning the Big 12. And then they dipped back to a 7-6 year this past year. And now I see that they are the last ranked, the lowest ranked recruiting school in the Big 12. And again, this is not just for one fiscal year. This is going back 6 fiscal years that they are just not spending anywhere close to everyone else. And there might be a lot that plays into that. And I know numbers can be manipulated in certain ways, but I have always wondered why Oklahoma State's an 8-win program most of the time. So they're a fringe top 25 team most of the time, if not better, but their recruiting classes are always 45, 50 in the country.
Yeah, I'll get a lot of people upset with me on this one, and I'm sure Cody, which I know you're going to have him on before too long, Cody Stovall.
Yeah,
he'll explain a little bit, and I know that they've got some answers for that. My thing is that there's this belief that's out there that they can't recruit on that same level as Oklahoma, and I think that's part of that's true, but part of it is that with Mike Gundy, he has been known as the guy that does a lot with less, right? He's going to go and get that 3-star guy and develop him into the guy that they want. And I think that in this day and time of what we're seeing nowadays with the transfer portal and with NIL money, and if you look at Oklahoma State, they have as good of facilities as anyone in the Big 12 for sure, and really better than most places in the country even. They have a huge amount of money that was left by T. Boone Pickens that allows them to be more competitive than what they are. But I also think that when you've got a guy that's been there 20 years and spent the better part of his life in Stillwater, the game kind of passes coaches by after a while, and I think that he has been resistant to change, and which we see that with a lot of coaches. That's nothing new. And if you listen to what Cody was saying, Cody will tell you that some of the moves that he made this year, he thinks they upgraded the wide receiver room. I'm not sure that I believe that. They lost 4 of their top 6 receivers. I'm not sure I believe that. He thinks that they're going to be fine at the running back position. I'm not sure I believe that either. But, and I'm not as close to that program as he is either. So I wouldn't say that he's definitely wrong. My problem is that you get this idea that I think coaches get comfortable, and he's getting paid an awful lot of money at $7.6 million a year on a 5-year revolving contract. It renews every year for 5 more years. So what you saw last year, when it's got to be somewhat alarming when you have that many guys jump into the portal at the same time, because they went into that TCU game undefeated. They have a 24-7 lead at the 10-minute mark of the second quarter, and they just sputter from there. You brought up the Big 12 championship game that they lost to Baylor. That sticks them into if they win that, they're in the CFP, no doubt about it. They had beaten Baylor handily. They lost by 6 inches, but they also had 4 turnovers, big at opportune times that they had those big turnovers. So I just feel like when it comes to big situations, they seem to come up small. Mike Gundy's beaten Oklahoma 3 times in 19 years. You would never last at OU like that. Never. If you don't figure out a way to beat Texas at least half the time, you're not going to be around long. That would never happen. So to me, it's just surprising. It tells you the difference in the two. They're 80 miles apart, but they're light years apart when it comes to expectations, and some of that has to do with it. I will say that it was something I had read in the Tulsa World, and I don't want to cite it too much because there is a number that really speaks to that on that recruiting money. Part of it is they don't have to use it as they have something with an airline or something like that they're able to bring some guys in, or they're able to have their coaches go and they don't have to spend it on airlines. I don't want to tell you exactly. I don't want to tell you wrong, so I don't want to say exactly what it is, but that would account for an awful lot of that money. And then or maybe it has something to do with lodging. I think it may be that they don't have to pay for lodging at. First off, they don't have, a Four Seasons there in Stillwater that they're having to stick them in or whatever. So they're putting them in the dorms. That's not costing right out of their pocket, but they could probably add what that would cost, when they bring somebody in for a visit or whatever. I think that was what it was that I read, but Cody will definitely help you on that. I know whenever you have him on the show, but I think that, yeah, they could do a better job of spending. And I think that Gundy could really he just seems indifferent to the recruiting game now. He hates he's said it often. He doesn't care for the transfer portal. I think that you have to not be resistant to that at this point. You can hate it if you want, but it's here to stay, as is NIL and everything else. Spencer Sanders wanted to come back, and they said no. I don't understand how you do that. You know what I mean? It's weird to me.
Yeah, that situation is weird. And Jason, though, everything that you outlined there is one of the big reasons why in posting those numbers, I made the disclaimer. A lot is open to context, and some of it we have an idea of what that context could be. A lot of it we have no idea, because there's going to be a perception by most college football fans when they look at these lists of either, man, are they overspending because they're just not delivering anything for this recruiting money, and then who's obviously taking advantage and seems to be using the most out of their money. But the things we don't generally know about are those types of things that you just outlined, where there's a perception that, well, if they're not spending the most, or if they're spending the least, then they must not care, whether that be as a coaching staff or certainly as a school. And again, there is a little bit of truth to that, but we don't know all the details that are involved. All right.
I would say one thing I would say is that they love that they. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Are you? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. No, one thing I would say, not to defend Okie Light, as I call them, but I think there's a perception that, you would say that they are number 2 in the Big 10 or in the Big 12 for the last 10 years as far as wins are concerned. Yep. So you have to give them that. They've won 6 out of the last 10 against Texas. They don't do well against Oklahoma, but they've done well against Texas. So, there's something that they're doing right there. I just think that there's, definitely this idea that Mike Gundy can do no wrong. I think that he's lived kind of through that and by that. And so I don't think that that's helpful for me moving forward. Just like what I said with Houston a minute ago, I feel like Oklahoma State should be in prime position to take over the ruling of this conference. And it just doesn't seem like he's willing to make the changes necessary to step to the front of the line and be consistently at the front of the line. So that would be my thing about it, but I don't want to come off as just completely trashing them, because I think that they've obviously done, and Coach Gundy has proven that he's done great things there. But I just think that sometimes the game passes you by, and I feel like you can't be resistant to change, because it's always going to change.
And you're right. If you're second in the Big 12 in wins to a blue blood, and you're outperforming another blue blood in Texas, that's a feather in Mike Gundy's hat. And then there's a number of programs like TCU, Kansas State that are capable when things work, and they've got the right coach to do what we saw TCU and Kansas State do last year. In particular, West Virginia is certainly pre-Big 12 had its run of major bowl appearances and so forth. So a lot of capable programs in the country that Oklahoma State is generally outperforming. So that's a credit to Mike Gundy as well. Now, last go around, Jason, in the Big 12, last go at a championship, and coming off, of course, 6 and 7. And this list is according to DraftKings. So Oklahoma win total at 8 with no difficult non-conference games. Got to take note of that, and we'll pop up the schedule here in a minute. But what's your first impression of the win total projection?
Yeah, I would hammer the over on that for Oklahoma. I think that with that schedule that you're going to talk about, I mean, they leave the state of Oklahoma 3 times in the entire season. So and one of those times is to Dallas, which I think Oklahomans would say is Okie South. So, yeah, I think that this is good for them. They've got, again, I said they very easily could have won 9 or 10 games a year ago had they just been a little better on defense, right? You can't expect that a Brent Venables team is going to continue to be bad defensively. So if they just make a small improvement, I think that 8 wins I think that's their bottom. We've talked about this a lot on my show and with some of the guys around, even some of the Texas guys. I think that's probably the lowest amount that an Oklahoma fan would be happy with at all would be 8 wins. And I don't even know how happy they'd be with it, not with this schedule. I think that they could easily win 10. I would hammer the over on that because I just feel like they would definitely get there. Texas, I think that they should obviously get over that as well. But I don't know. There's something about what's going on at Texas is that they always recruit well. They have talent. But Steve Sarkisian's never won 10 games in his career, and he's been at Washington, USC, and now Texas, and he just hadn't done it. So until he does, can you expect it? It's only 8.5. I think he's won 9 before. He's only won 9 once. So, yeah, I might go on the under there because since it's 8.5, I would probably hit the under on that because I don't trust him. But that would probably just be one of my, kind of stick it to him bets type of deal.
I don't trust Sark either.
We were looking at I don't trust Sark, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Jason, my deal on Sark is he just got roughly a top 5 job in the country. Now, what did he ever do to earn that? If you look at his work at Washington, you look at his work at USC, and you just outlined the never won double digits, and his predecessors and his successors at both schools did better than he did. You can win big at Washington, and obviously you can win big at USC. And I know that there were off the field things that worked against him that were of his doing, of course, but still, man, he's had 2 big programs, and he wasn't a disaster, but he won 60% of his games. He didn't do what you should be able to do with those programs that other coaches have accomplished. And now he's handed another one. Well, he's in year 3 now, and
7-win Sark.
Something.
Yeah, he's 7-win Sark. There's a reason why he got that nickname, 7-win Sark. And I'll tell you, I mean, obviously, I give Steve Sarkisian a lot of credit for being able to face his demons and get rid of that problem. But it kind of does tell you a lot of what, when you go to the Nick Saban School of coaches rehabilitation, I should say, then it means a lot because obviously he gets in there. He's following Lane Kiffin, doesn't have to make a huge change to anything that was going on there. I mean, they coached together at USC also. So he knew that offense. I think that Sark's very good offensively. His problems that I've seen in his first 2 seasons at Texas is that he comes out with a great game plan to start the game. Adjustments seem to be an issue. Because everybody makes an adjustment at the half, he doesn't seem to. The Oklahoma State loss this past season was ridiculous to me. You've got Bijan was having a great day, and you just forgot about him in that third quarter, and you had a 17-point lead at that point. I told some people on my show I would have stamped U.S. mail on Bijan's butt and sent him over and over again from there. I just would have. But I agree with you. I think that I don't know why. The only thing I can figure is that he had the endorsement of Nick Saban. That's why he should be the guy. And they just make some odd hires. I honestly didn't think that they should have gotten rid of the coach that was there. He had them, it looked to me like Tom Herman would have them in the right position. They had been in the Big 12 championship game that year against Kyler Murray, beating them earlier in the season. That was they hadn't won a conference championship though in 13 years. So it's I don't know. It's an odd deal to me. It's a great program as far as recruiting is concerned. You have all the resources in the world in Austin. So there's really no excuse to not win at this point. There's really no excuse. And I think that his seat's going to get really warm if they're not playing for the Big 12 championship this season on their way out. I really
To
think
extend on your point, Jason, I thought the situation around Tom Herman was a bit odd too in terms of their timing, because while the COVID year counted, the games counted, there was a championship. They went 7-3. They annihilated Colorado in the bowl game, and those 3 losses were like excruciatingly close. Like they were probably a top 10 to 15 team in the country.
One of those losses was to LSU, right? The national champions.
Yeah, well, 2020, no, but the year before.
No, not 2020.
Yep. Yeah, they took Joe Burrow and company down to the wire. Yeah, when we didn't know who Joe Burrow was. Well, we know who he was. You know what I mean? We didn't know he was going to be Joe Burrow quite yet. First game of the season, or second maybe. That 2020 season, they lost on a last-second field goal in a game. I'm not going to get into the granular, but that they had a couple dropped passes, things go against them, and Iowa State's kicking the game-winning field goal on the last play of the game. Otherwise, Texas is in the Big 12 championship game. So I don't know that you fire a coach that you're coming off an odd year where you couldn't meet with your team for 6 months, and you come that close to going to the Big 12 championship game, and you went to the Big 12 championship game 2 years before that. Not that that's the Texas standard, but you give them another run, I think. But here we are.
It seemed like it was going in the right direction, is what I was saying. I thought it was the weirdest move to me, and it's almost like there's not another Sark out there. I mean, it was almost like that was the why they did it, was because it was like, oh wow, Sark's available. We're not going to get another chance at this guy. Really? You know what I mean? It's there, and there's not 5 other guys just like him. To me, it just seemed weird. It just seemed weird. But
it did, because my thought was not unique at the time. I know that a lot of people were thinking, oh, they got rid of Tom Herman, Urban Meyer's there.
Right.
That's the target. Now, if that's the move, then that's completely different, of course.
That I would have understood it completely. The guy, I mean, you're going after a national title today, and he's the next step up from a guy like this. I mean, of course, Tom worked for Urban, but I think that, that was where I thought they were headed. It surprised me. It really did. When it was Sark, I was like, why? Of course, being an Oklahoma fan, I hope he stays forever, because, they have the biggest comeback in Red River history. Obviously, Caleb Williams engineered that big comeback, and you just seen him continue to. It just seems like he has a hard time adjusting, and that's the big thing. I don't know if he forgets about whatever. The Oklahoma State game, I was just like, what? I watched that game like thinking, there's no way they don't win this thing, and they did the same thing the year before. Was it 6 in a row that they had the lead at halftime and lost?
Yeah.
They really had no reason to lose that year. Now, there was some culture things that obviously, no matter what, when you change staffs, not everybody's going to fit this new system and new coach. I get that. But I think that he's been given a lot more leash than I expected that he would. I think that he better win this year. I think that they better at least play for the championship in the Big 12 headed out of here, or you may not see him when they get to the SEC in 2024. I just don't. I could feel that I could see that happening real easy, that they pull the plug on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They not only appear to have the best team on paper, they appear to have clearly the best team on paper. But we've heard that before. Just to answer your question there.
Team on paper.
Yeah, for sure. Shoelace Sooner, just to answer your question, this is an interesting list, Mark. I've seen it 9.5 from others for OU. Is this the latest? And I'm just behind on the latest. I don't know what the latest is exactly. I don't see a date on this, but this is the DraftKings list that I know that came out sometime
Wow,
this
where'd
week.
you see
So
9.5? I wonder. That's a lot. That seems like a lot.
yeah, that's really jumping from 8 to 9.5.
That's a
So
big jump. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Kind of looking at some of these other ones. I mean, the Oklahoma State win total with all those guys. I mean, they're so unproven at everywhere. I'm not saying that they're terrible. Cody's going to tell you that they're not. He likes them in a lot of places. I have a hard time believing that they can get to 8 wins. I know that it's rare that they've had a losing season, but I would see Oklahoma State having that this year, if anything. TCU's win totals off a little high for me too. I think their quarterback situation's okay, but the supporting guys around the quarterback there, I question it. And I also wonder, when you get 67 points hung on you in the national championship game, you kind of have to expect a hangover there. So I'm a little, I don't really like the TCU or Oklahoma State win total. Maybe 8, and I think Sonny's a great coach, but I just don't know I think there's a lot of unknowns for that when it comes to that. Texas Tech and Baylor. Yeah, Baylor. What's up with that? I don't understand what's going on in down in Waco. They're back and forth, and maybe this is their year that they bounce back up, but something's weird about that Dave Aranda program to me.
yeah, it has been a back and forth deal in his first few years, no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, I wanted to hit you up on SEC scheduling. So,
okay,
this is an exciting time for college football fans, even if you don't root for Oklahoma or Texas or USC or UCLA, to see. And I know for a lot of people, and this is a discussion for another time that we've had a zillion times here on our main channel, mostly just about, is this tearing college football from its fabric in regards to geography and tradition and all that. But that aside, just looking at the excitement of seeing those kind of programs playing new opponents every year, to me, I think is exciting. So for Oklahoma, of course, there's been a lot of talk concerning who are going to be those set permanent opponents in the SEC. I saw an article that I didn't have a chance to dive into right before we came on because we are anticipating the announcement of a scheduling format to come out at any time. And the SEC gathers in Destin later this month, usually around Memorial Day weekend. And a lot of big news typically comes from those meetings. So we're expecting it
right.
schedule format to come out. What would be, I'll ask it in two different paths. One would be your preference on Oklahoma's, let's say, 3 permanent opponents. And do you think those will be the 3, or what do you think will be those 3 common opponents?
Yeah, we've done some different stuff on this, and I think right as they announced that it was going to be that it was going to happen in 24, because there was a big question about whether it would or not.
Yep.
We kind of dived into some of that and speculated. Obviously, I had heard some different things. I was thinking that more than obviously the one that for sure is going to happen is going to be Texas OU. That's not changing. That's one of the biggest rivalries in college sports. I think that rivalries absolutely carry college football. And they didn't bring those guys into the SEC to have them not play every year. So that that one's going to be one of their obvious ones. You heard Sankey talking about restoring that Big 8 rivalry with Mizzou. I think Oklahoma fans could care less about the Missouri one. So in that vein, and I could care less about the Missouri one, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm not trying to badmouth Mizzou, but I just don't care. We're going to see them at least every other year anyway. Yeah. I don't really care about that game. Yeah, I think early on we were looking at maybe A&M. I would like to see them play A&M again. Just because That's always been a semi rivalry as well. Of course, Oklahoma's kind of dominated that series too. Arkansas would be another one of those regional rivalries that didn't get to be played an awful lot because they were in the old Southwest Conference, not the Big Eight. But of course, that one's probably going to renew with Texas. I don't know. But then when Ross Dellinger's report came out, and that's the one that Saban kind of had a little backlash to,
Yep.
which makes you wonder how if Saban's backlashing and upset about it, it makes you kind of feel like that's what's going to happen. Well, it turns out they're looking at it there, and it's going to be Missouri, Texas. If for Oklahoma, it'd be Missouri, Texas, and Florida. Which then you start thinking about that. It's like, oh, okay, I could deal with that. And so where you originally thought you start thinking in regional terms because that's just how it would generally be. But then you start thinking of possibilities, and that's not a bad deal. I think that would be a great possibility, to start up. They've only played each other twice in history, but, they were two big games. One was in the Cotton Bowl, and then, of course, you played for the national championship that year. And I did a collaboration with High Top Sports, and we kind of talked about this. And, I think both sides are a little excited about that. They're kind of same trajectory, of these programs. That going to the Swamp every other year would be an amazing, amazing place to go and play a lot. It opens up. There's a lot of intrigue there. I feel like that's where we thought it was going to be. But then you start hearing some other conflicting things. And so I know you were talking about it precast. Well, what are some of the things you're hearing right now? You're getting some complaints. Who's really complaining? So that they're thinking it's going to be some differences. I listen to Ross Dellinger when it comes to that stuff. He's pretty close to the SEC. So, and if Nick Saban is responding to what he read in SI, maybe there was more to it than that. But
well, as you mentioned, Nick Saban, came out about a month ago in response to those reports with
right.
And he didn't attack it directly to say, we don't want to play LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn, but he did come out and say, who makes this stuff up? And I did a video on it. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was comical to me because it's like, come on. If there's a team in the SEC that I could name the three teams that they should play with less argument than any other school in the conference, it would be Bama. They've got a rivalry with Tennessee. Everybody's recognizes that. They obviously have to play the Iron Bowl. The LSU game, I guess from a traditional standpoint in the SEC, is not necessarily a rivalry with Alabama, but they've been in the conference forever together, and they've played in the SEC West together since 92. And over the past 10 or 15 years, it's been one of the most watched games of the season in college football every year. So
absolutely,
who else are you going to play? Those are the three obvious. You could pick out just about anybody else and we could have a pretty good argument over who they should be playing. But Bama, they seem to be the easiest one to nail down, and here he's complaining about it. I also thought it was kind of funny that Brian Kelly, and he may have been completely sincere in this statement, but he makes the statement, hey, bring them on. We want as tough a schedule as you can give us. Bring them on. That's why I came down here, because we want to play the best. We're going to beat the best. We're going to play the best. And I'm thinking, that sounds tough, but you have no equity in this league. You're just going to have to play who you're going to have to play anyway. So you might as well talk tough and say, bring them on, because it's not going to matter what you say.
Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't care and I mean, it's a no-win situation for him, right? In that respect. And I think that they've kind of built some kind of a little rivalry going with Texas A&M. And now I know Texas A&M, they don't want anything to do with Texas every year again. I think that it would be ludicrous for the SEC to not make that game happen every year again. It's been 10 years since we've seen it. I understand why A&M doesn't want to play it, but I think that they should. I also think, that would be, again, the other one that I feel like you would want to see them play would be Oklahoma. But they have built some kind of little rivalry there with LSU for the past 4 or 5 years. They have that big the most overtimes in history, the longest game in history deal. So we've seen some good ones out of them. Again, I don't know. The one thing I would say about anybody that's complaining about it, I mean, no matter what, this format is better than what they're doing now in the SEC, right?
Oh yeah.
They're going to move up to 9 games all the time, which I like. I don't want to see. I hate the end of the year Citadel games or Tennessee State games. I hate that. I don't want to see it. Now it's less likely that you're going to see that. But and no matter what, every other year you're going to have played. Every 2 years you will have played the entire conference. Right now you're not seeing that. What is it? What Georgia and A&M hadn't played but until this past year at all, or the past couple of years at all, and they've been in the league for 10 years, and you haven't played Georgia yet. That's a weird little. I mean, and look, I mean, I don't claim to know everything about everything, but this format seems perfect for being able to see if this is the best conference. You want to see them all play each other all the time. So I'm excited about that now you will have played. And for a fan, particularly if coming into this unbelievable conference, you get an opportunity to see all these new venues that you haven't seen before. In a 4-year period, you will have been in every stadium in the league. So to me, I'm excited about it. I don't really care where they end up at this point. I like the idea of having a Florida matchup every year. That opens up a pipeline for Oklahoma, really. You get to go down there, and I think they already have that pipeline open, but a lot of those kids that you're trying to recruit to be able to play there every other year, that's awesome because they're going to see you every other year. They're going to get more familiar with that program. I think that's a good thing on that end of it. Whoever it ends up, I think we'll deal with it because nobody gets to hide from this schedule no matter what because of that 3-6 format. I don't think that there's really, I guess there's quote unquote tougher schedules than some. What was it Saban was saying that, I'd rather they went all time instead of the last 10 years because Tennessee's one of the all time teams in the SEC. Well, you beat them 15 times in a row. What are you complaining about? You know what I mean? It's just, to me, and I mean, really, it took everything going wrong for Alabama for them to lose it by 1 freaking point this past year to make it, or else it would have been 16 in a row. So I don't know what he's complaining about. I do believe that Josh Heupel has it headed in the right direction, obviously in Knoxville, but I don't know what you're complaining about. But Nick Saban complains about everything these days. This is what he does,
Well, like you say, the scheduling has been, for me, corrected or at least improved exponentially by the 3-6-6 model, because as you just outlined, it's ridiculous that you have 2 divisions and you play somebody every year and then you rotate through the other ones. So, extrapolate this out for generations. And for example, Texas A&M and South Carolina are permanent rivals in the SEC. I can't think of 2 schools that have less to do with each other than Texas A&M and South Carolina, and they play every year. So Texas A&M, like if they kept this format, if Texas and Oklahoma did not join the SEC and the SEC continued with this format for the next 60 years, South Carolina and Texas A&M would play 60 times, but Texas A&M would play Georgia 10 times. That's asinine. And it
right.
makes total sense. I get that there are natural rivals on the other side of the conference. So yes, you ensure Alabama and Tennessee play. You ensure that Georgia and Auburn play. It's the South's oldest rivalry. But I never understood why you had to do that with everyone. And the rest of them are just placeholders. Ole Miss and Vandy don't have a rivalry. Mississippi State and Kentucky do not have a rivalry. So why force them into a rivalry? You could be more creative and you could be more equitable with the schedule if you just kept the rivalry cross divisions, but you left the rest of them just open. The ACC, the same thing.
Right.
They forced Virginia Tech and Boston College to play every year cross division. They have nothing to do with each other just because it's a placeholder. They have
Couldn't be
to.
more opposite.
Yeah, it makes no sense. So yeah, you said it. The 366 is going to improve things exponentially because even if you argue that the SEC has made a mistake with somebody's schedule, it's not this grave mistake that they made 30 years ago that's going to come up every year. You're still going to, at the very least, you're going to play everyone every other year. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, there's nowhere to hide. And I think that, you could say, well, I mean, look, you think about I'm thinking on Oklahoma. So the Alabama and Georgia, neither one of them, in the models we've seen, is a yearly deal because of the rivalries that they already have. So you start looking at that and you think, wow. But you get them every other year, and how is that going to work out? Are you going to get them both on the road in that year? You're going to get. Are they going to split it? Are you going to play Alabama one year, Georgia the next, or you get them both in the same year?
Mm-hmm.
So LSU, Tennessee in there. I mean, there's just really nowhere to hide. It's just really nowhere to hide. And so, I have no problem with this thing. And I think it's good for as much as I go back and forth about whether all this realignment is great for college football or not. I hate to see, some of these regional rivalries gone away, and they have for a long time. I don't like it that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State aren't going to play anymore. I think it's ridiculous. But because I don't think you have to be in the same conference to play. But some of these things that are going away, this right here, and the Big Ten finally going to do the same thing. We were talking about it for the SEC, but the Big Ten's doing it too. Same model. They hadn't, gotten too deep into how it's going to, who's going to be the permanents or whatever. But I think when you look at the Big Ten, it's completely inequitable now. You've got the East Division dominates, and the West Division. I mean, when is the West Division? Even if they did win the conference championship, they would have never made the playoff. Almost never. So to me, I'm glad that they're doing that. So now you're going to play everybody. You're going to not just play that one side has it this easy. And I'm with you. Every other year you're playing everybody. So you don't get to have a duck in the schedule there. Because if you look at Georgia this year, their schedule's trash.
Yeah.
Now they were going to play Oklahoma. That was one of the things that it got because of the way that it ended up falling. Oklahoma is leaving a year early, but they canceled that game because of the fact that they thought they were going to leave early. I get that. But the rest of it wasn't good. And then you look at Ohio State's schedule for the last 2 years. It's terrible. They don't play anybody, and they played Notre Dame. But I mean, obviously aside from Notre Dame, then they don't play anybody again until they get to Penn State 6 or 7 weeks later. So it's tough. And that was a very top heavy league there in the last few years, especially. But I feel like that's where it's going to even things out in the SEC and the Big Ten, and which is exciting. If you're going to make these super conferences, I want to see them all play each other. That's for sure.
I could dive into a Big 12, Big 10 schedule comparison, but I will refrain from doing so. We appreciate Jason being here.
Bring me on when you do. I want to do that.
Okay.
Bring me on when you do.
All right. We got Jason Watkins here, College Football Hall of Fame podcast. It's right here on YouTube, so you can get on over there immediately and check out what Jason's got going there again on College Football Hall of Fame podcast. Jason, appreciate you making this work this week.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me on again. It was good being on the show the last time, talking realignment. We're doing a lot of that kind of talk right now on my channel. Obviously, it's kind of gripped the country, so we're going to keep talking about that. More stuff coming from Oklahoma. We broke down yesterday. We kind of broke down the best quarterback rooms in the Big 12 heading into this season, so check that out on there. And we're also at hofmedia.us, and then as you can see there, at BirdieManDub on Twitter. let me know what you want to talk about, and we will.
Folks, we've got a big lineup the rest of the day. Wednesday's also always jam-packed. 5 o'clock Michigan, 6 Florida State, 7 Miami, and we've tacked on Oregon after that. All right, Jason, appreciate you being here. Have
Thanks
a good
a
one.
lot. Appreciate it.
All right,
Alrighty.
everyone. See you
Bye-bye.
back here next Wednesday for Sooners Live.